Welcome to At the Table with Tony. My name is Anthony
just me?
Scillia, better known as Tony Mangia, and we are here today for our live stream edition. We are talking all about Saint Angelo of Licata, or Saint Angelo of Jerusalem, or Saint Angelo of Sicily. So he has different titles. He is the proto-martyr of the Carmelite order, and today is his feast day. And we're going to get into the reason why I decided to kind of do this show all about Saint Angelo. But I want to introduce our guests first. So first we have Father Eugene Carrella. He is a pastor of St. Rita's Church in Staten Island, New York. He is a priest of the Archdiocese of New York. We're also being joined by Father Justin Maria. He is a Carmelite priest and friar. And last but not least, we are being joined by Brendan Young of Buffalo, New York. He is a volunteer up at St. Anthony of Padua Church, and he's a real plethora of knowledge on Italian and Catholic traditions. So, gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for taking some time out to come on the At the Table with Tony show.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tony. Great to be back.
Well, it's a pleasure to have all of you, like I said. So let's get into who each of you guys are and your backgrounds, and then we'll get into, like I said, the topic of the night, or the topic of the evening, the topic of the day, the saint of the day, Saint Angelo, or Saint Angelus. I guess Angelus would be his Latinized name. So, Father Justin, you are a Carmelite. This is one of your saints. So I would like for you to start by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Yes. So my name is Father Justin Maria. I am originally from the Bronx, but my background, I guess, in Italy would be Calabrese. So my family came from Calabria 4 generations ago. So it's been a while, but I grew up in an Italian-American family in the Bronx. I entered the seminary young. I started in the diocesan seminary in high school, and I was ordained 13 years ago. Will be next week, May 12th. Will be 13th year anniversary of my priesthood. And after being a priest for about 8 years, I discerned the religious life, and I joined the Carmelite order 5 years ago. So I'm in temporary vows as a Carmelite. I'll be taking my solemn vows in August, perpetual vows in the order. So the past 5 years, I've been in formation and then temporary vows. Presently, the chaplain at Iona Preparatory School in New Rochelle. I live in our priory here in Terrytown, New York. So it's a Transfiguration Priory. So I live with 4 friars. Most of the friars work in the parish. I'm the chaplain at the school. So I live in the community here, say my prayers in the morning with the community. I go to school during the day. It's a 20-minute ride. Spend the day in ministry there, come back in the evenings, and community prayers and dinner and whatnot. So that's kind of my life presently now. My ministry is with high school students, and also there's a grammar school as well. So it's K through 12, all boys school run by the Christian Brothers, who's also their feast day today of Blessed.
Yes, that's right.
But so I was kind of conflicted because this morning it's a memorial, obligatory memorial for us here. So we had the feast of Saint Angelus here, and then I went to school and had mass for the Christian Brothers for their feast of Blessed Edmund Rice. So I celebrated both today, but it's been beautiful.
Excellent. With that, again, thank you for joining us, Father. Father Eugene, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I was born in Brooklyn, and I entered seminary in college. I was ordained in 1984. So December 1st, I will be ordained 36 years. And I'm currently the pastor of St. Rita here on Staten Island. My family moved to Staten Island when I was 9. So in 1967, we all moved from Brooklyn here to Staten Island. And that's my life.
What is your Italian background? Where is your family from in Italy?
Well, we're from 4 different places. My father's parents were both born in Italy, but met and married in Brooklyn. My mother's grandparents were born in Italy. So I was from, my mother's mother was from Santa Margherita Bellice in Sicily. And her father's family was from Pignola in Potenza. And my father's mother's family was from Tocco Casauria in Abruzzi. And his father was from Palma Campania near Avellino.
Oh wow! Okay, so you're a strong Southern Italian.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
All these great towns. I'm sure we could. There's stories about each of those towns, and each of those towns have a specific saints that they
I've
have
researched
devotions to.
those saints, and so it's kind of that's my interest. I like,
Mhm.
I love doing that. I love going back to my roots, the roots of Southern Italians, parishes that were started by the Southern Italians here in the Archdiocese and all over the United States.
We're going to have to talk more to have a whole show about that, because there's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack.
Yes.
And we could be, again, we just talking on that topic, we could be here for about 3 weeks
Yes.
easily. And last but not least, we're joined by Brendan Young from he's up in Buffalo, New York. So Brendan, give us a little bit about your background. I know you've been a guest on the show a couple of times, so welcome
Right.
back.
So this is the third time's the charm. Despite the name, as I've said before, my paternal grandmother Concetta was born and raised in the town of Musumeli, which is in the province of Caltanissetta in Sicily, almost in the center of Sicily. And I grew up in the Madrice, or the mother church of Western New York's Italian and Italian American communities, which is Saint Anthony of Padua, Sant'Antonio da Padova, founded in 1891 by the missionaries of St. Charles Borromeo, the Scalabrinian fathers, and staffed by them until the beginning of 2012. And it's really there that I received an excellent formation spiritually, culturally, on a human level, where I really learned what it means to be Italian, what it means to be Italian American, and most importantly, what it means to be Catholic. And it is also where I discovered treasured and beloved expressions of popular piety, as well as the sacred liturgy in its traditional form as well. So on Sundays, we have both the traditional Latin Mass, otherwise known as the extraordinary form of the Roman Rite, and then the ordinary form, or the new Mass in in Italian rather, every Sunday. So many of those Italian Masses throughout the year, after the Mass, we have several processions. During the Mass, we honor various saints. And one of those, who is today's saint, and the reason why we're here today, is Saint Angelo of Jerusalem, or Sant'Angelo da Gerusalemme, or better known as Sant'Angelo di Licata, the patron saint of Licata, which is in Sicily's province of Agrigento. So you're showing that on the screen. I don't want to give more away right now, but that's basically who I am. I'm the executive director of the American delegation of the Sacred Military Constantinian Order of St. George, which I started a month ago, thanks be to God. And that's a wonderful opportunity to really further my love and my appreciation for, and my debt of gratitude to my heritage, and above all to my faith. So it's great to be here.
Well,
In the company of two wonderful priests and yourself, Tony. Non stiamo scherzando. We're not joking around.
Well, again, I want to thank all of you guys for taking some time out to come on the show. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of the evening. Let's get into what this night's all about. It's about Sant'Angelo, or Saint Angelus. So I guess we could start with Father Justin, since you are the Carmelite in the room, and since this is a Carmelite saint. Can you give us a little bit of background on Sant'Angelo?
Well, yes, San Angelo originally was from the Holy Land, and that's why we call him Saint Angelo of Jerusalem. So he was a Jewish man, and his mother converted to Catholicism, and eventually him and his twin brother also converted, and both became Carmelites. They both joined the Carmelite order. And then Sant'Angelo wanted to live a life like a hermit for most of his time, and from the Holy Land, Mount Carmel. And then eventually he was asked to go to Italy. There's a beautiful legend that when he went to Rome to have the rule kind of approved by Pope Honorius, he met St. Francis and St. Dominic. So, a lot of times Carmelites get a little bit of a, kind of because we see Elijah the prophet as our father. So most of the Mendicant orders, they either trace their, like Francis, the Franciscans, and St. Dominic, the Dominicans, but we always say Elijah is our father. So we kind of get made fun of by the other Mendicant orders saying, how could you prove that, Elijah? but who's your historical person? But the fact that the Carmelites were around before, kind of Francis and Dominic, and then Saint Angelo's meeting Francis and Dominic in Rome, I think is a very beautiful thing. And there's like a legend that he prophesied, Saint Angelus prophesied to Saint Francis that he was going to receive the wounds of Jesus, the stigmata, and then Saint Francis prophesied to Saint Angelus that he was going to die a martyr's death. So that's just a little kind of side information. Anyway, he wound up in Sicily, and he was preaching against the Albigensian heresy, and he was trying to convert this Catharian knight who was living in an incestuous relationship, and he's the one who martyred him and stabbed him for his, for trying to convert him, basically.
So the picture on the screen is the picture of I guess the martyrdom, where there's the sword of the Cathar knight in the chest of Sant'Angelo. I'm putting that on the screen right now. So yes, that's. So I guess from Jerusalem he went to Rome first and then to Sicily.
Well,
then
first,
yes.
Well, I mean, he originally landed in Sicily.
Okay.
Went to Rome and then came back. And I'm not sure if, kind of similar to St. Paul, he somehow also ended up in Malta. We know that Paul was shipwrecked in Malta, and there's a tremendous devotion to St. Angelus, thanks to the Calced Carmelites, to which Father Justin Maria belongs, in Malta. So I'm not sure, but first he landed in Messina, of course, and then I don't know if he visited Palermo, and then he went to Rome, but in any case, he went to Rome, and he was charged by the Carmelites. He was a contemporary of St. Albert of Jerusalem, the Bishop of Jerusalem, not to be confused with St. Albert of Trapani, who was another great early Celtic Carmelite. But it was given to Angelus to bring this codified rule, the Carmelite rule written by St. Albert of Jerusalem, to Pope, I believe it was Pope Honorius, the same Pope who had given the approbation to Francis and Dominic.
Yes.
So that's why he went to Rome, and it was there that he also was able to preach. St. Angelus preached, tradition tells us, in the Pope's Cathedral, the Cathedral of Rome, the Basilica of St. John Lateran. And not far away at all, I was privileged to live in Rome for 2 years, and close by is the convent. I believe it's the Minerva, Santa Maria sopra la Minerva, unless it's Santa Sabina. But in any case, above the cell, which is now a chapel, it has this sign. Here met Francis, Dominic, and Angelus. And it's tradition also tells us that St. Angelus and St. Dominic, somehow it's kind of mixed, this tradition, but it's a beautiful tradition that's been handed down to us, that St. Francis gave them the Franciscan cincture, the Franciscan cord. And so in some depictions of Angelus, you find him wearing, along with his Carmelite habit, not the usual Carmelite cincture, but the Franciscan cord. And it's also said that on that same occasion, Dominic said that one day through the rosary and the scapular, which I'm not sure how this would work out, because tradition tells us that St. Simon Stock received the scapular from Our Lady July 16th, 1251. But in any case, so there's these different traditions, but it is not just probable. I'm sure that these three great mendicants, saints, did encounter each other there. Whether or not the associated traditions are all verifiable is a different story. But then in any case, so Angelus went back from Rome down to Sicily. He visited Palermo, of course, and he healed the bishop, the Archbishop of Palermo, of some malady. And he went down, he's said to have gone, so he made his way down the island, Caltabellotta, Muxaro, of which he's also a patron, and the town is now called Sant'Angelo Muxaro, Cefala, and then, not to be confused, which maybe Cefala Diana may be a different paese, but it's not Cefalu. And then he made his way down to Licata, which is where he stayed. And Angelus, as Father Justin Maria mentioned, he was preaching against the main heresies, the Albigensian heresy, which was the early mission of the order of preachers, the Dominicans and the Cathari, those heretics. And that heretic noble, I guess, in some way, Berengarius was the one living in that incestuous relationship that Angelus was preaching against at that church of Saints Philip and James, I believe, which is interesting too, because in the preconciliar calendar, they were celebrated on May 1st. Later, that feast is switched around. But in any case, Angelus, the picture that you showed, Anthony, of Angelus with the dagger in his chest, which you can also see in my statue, and here is the original banner of the Society of Sant Angelo di Licata in Buffalo. From the banner dates to 1922, but the devotion predates that. A Carmelite hermit, a friend of mine, pointed out to me that this depiction of him, actually I have here too, I don't mean to overwhelm you with images, but this is the statue, the main statue in Licata, and you can see again the one dagger in his chest, but it said that he died also of 5 wounds, which evokes the 5 wounds of our Lord. But the Carmelite hermit priest friend of mine told me that this depiction is really sanitized. It's sanitized because, like St. Peter Martyr, or St. Peter of Verona, another early Dominican saint and martyr, Angelus was also stabbed in the head. And so in the real depictions, the more true to life, but also graphic depictions of Peter of Verona, St. Peter Martyr, he has the dagger also in his head. So Angelus has been cleaned up a bit. But he again, he was preaching, and it was 800 years ago today, May 5th, 1220, that he was ordained, that he was martyred, rather. Only a few years a priest, and he was, I think, 20 and 15 is what, 35? So he was 35 years old.
Yeah, relatively young. So he did quite a bit in those years that the Lord gave him.
Absolutely. And I know St. Angelus, and I don't mean to hog anything or to steal the show, but I know St. Angelus has a special meaning and significance for Father Carrella, so I'm sure he'd like to speak to that.
I did want to get into that. So I know, Father Carrella, you are a third order Carmelite, correct?
Yes.
And so I want you to tell the story. So
Actually, my story is not so eloquent. Many years ago, maybe I was in high school, maybe 1975. I went into the Church of Sacred Heart St. Stephen's in Brooklyn, and looking around at all the beautiful statues, the one that impressed me the most was the statue that they have of Sant Angelo. I never heard of him before. And so when I came home, I guess back then there was no internet. I looked up in my statue book, in my saint books, and I just found out that he was from Sicily. And that image with the dagger in his chest, and it just left a lasting impression on me. And I knew really nothing of him. I mean, mostly what Brendan was saying is the first time I've really heard many of these things. So because I became a third order Carmelite, I wanted to take the name of a Carmelite saint. And that's the statue in Sacred Heart St. Stephen's in Brooklyn. I wanted to take the name of a Carmelite saint, and I figured I would honor my Sicilian heritage by taking Saint Angelo as my Carmelite name. So, Brendan, I appreciate the information that you've given. I don't know if it's true or not, but tradition is that Saint Albert of Jerusalem and he were brothers. Is that maybe Justin?
I know he had a twin, at least, his brother John, who entered Carmel with him.
Yes.
I'm sure Father Justin Maria might be able to clarify about St. Albert, but certainly they were companions in religious life.
Yeah, so the other thing I was wondering too, and maybe you could expand on this, Brendan, if you know, with St. Angelus, was he left to the patriarch, or wasn't someone educating
Well,
him before he entered Carmel?
So his parents, and some accounts differ, that his parents were named Jesse or Joseph and Mary. Some accounts say that both parents were converts from Judaism to Catholicism. Others say just the mother, but the mother, at least, certainly raised these two sons in the faith and entrusted them to, I believe, the patriarch of Jerusalem at the time was Nicodemus. And so he instructed them in the faith and other things, and then they entered the order at Mount Carmel. I mean, and then there was a convent, or what we would now call a friary or priory of St. Anne, by the I forgot the name of it, but a certain famous gate in Jerusalem. And
St. Anne's Priory or
right,
St. Anne's
right.
Convent.
So I'm not sure if
Golden Gate, near the Golden Gate.
If there was a blood relationship to Albert of Jerusalem, but certainly they were contemporaries. My guess would be that Albert was the superior or the prior. And it's interesting too, and I think that a Carmelite priest and a third order Carmelite priest would appreciate this, both very busy in their ministries, that when Angelus was ordained a priest, he didn't go out preaching, at least not right away. He went back, true to the Carmelite charism, into the desert. He went back to live the life of a hermit before he went out and preached, in imitation also of our Lord, who was first formed in the hidden life before he started his public ministry. And I should have added too that Angelus, when he reached Sicily, being a converted Jew, he wasn't very well received by many, but he still tried to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ among the Jews in Sicily. Some he converted, others, it seems, were obstinate and did not embrace the gospel, but he was certainly a target. He was a target because any priest really who's being faithful is a target, and nothing's changed in 2,000 years of Christianity, and nothing's changed in 800 years since Angelus was martyred. But Berengarius, or Berengario, he was convicted, we could say. He was, Angelus's preaching really got to him, bothered him on the two counts. One was the moral count of that incestuous relationship, and the other was because he was one of the Cathari, one of the heretics, and he was further enraged because the woman with whom he was in that relationship with was converted by Angelus's preaching, and she left Berengarius. So that was, we say in English, the straw that broke the camel's back, which led to the daggers being plunged into Angelus's chest. And growing up in my parish, Tony, I don't know if you can show the picture of the large statue in my parish of St. Anthony's, but this statue of St. Angelus absolutely enthralled me as a boy, as a young man. We're so exposed in our country to this suburbanite mega church expression of Catholicism that's so diluted and sanitized. And part of that, of course, is the absence of really beautiful religious artwork that inspires us, that lifts us up, but also forms us. It's forming, it's formative in the gospel and in our traditions. And so to see this dagger in this Carmelite's chest and blood, and again, it's pretty cleaned up, but you can see a little bit, the blood spilling out. This really struck me. Who was this saint? And he's depicted also in a stained glass window of our local Discalced Carmelite monastery of nuns as St. Angelus, but not as graphic again. So there's this local devotion to him that just enthralled me. And even though I'm not Licatese, I'm Musumolese, saints are saints, and saints are for everyone, no matter what town or village or city you come from or country. And so even though I don't come from the areas in which he's venerated, although he is depicted in Musumeli in the former, it's still a church, but it was at one time in the care of the Carmelite friars. Our Lady of Mount Carmel is the name of the church. but he's depicted there too. But there's not really a devotion to him, at least anymore in my town. But just as an Italian American and just as a Catholic, he has a real message to speak to us today, 800 years later. You know, the church is under attack. Marriage and the family are under attack in such an overpowering way today. And Angelus died a martyr for the truth of Jesus Christ, particularly as it applies to the sacrament of marriage.
I think though also that the one of the reasons why that I wanted to do this show, particularly about Sant'Angelo or St. Angelus, is because that I guess it was in 1636, 1656, or in the 1600s, there was a plague that kind of descended upon the Kingdom of Naples, and it's believed that through the intercession of Sant'Angelo, that this plague was wiped away, was cleared up, and we are living in a modern day plague by the name of COVID-19, coronavirus. So I think it's very, very interesting that again 800 years ago he was martyred. Now we're coming into this whole pandemic, that we can maybe somehow pray to this saint. Obviously, San Rocco is a very powerful saint against plagues. Santa Rosalia, which we talked about last time, Brendan, when you were on the show talking about different saints. Excuse me. So I think that that it really is this, you know, it's important now of all times to kind of talk about the Sant'Angelo, St. Angelus. So Father Eugene, do you have any anything that you can add about Sant'Angelo regarding the plague?
This is the first I've heard of that, to be honest with you.
Really?
For me, in my head, plague, Saint Rocco. In fact, I put a statue of him in our church.
Mm-hmm.
Statue I salvaged from a church that closed in East Harlem, from St. Lucy's. It's a life-size one. I repainted it, and I had it in the basement of the office building. And once coronavirus spread, I had him put in the church, and a lot of people have come to see the statue and to pray. So for me, it's always Saint Rocco.
St. Rocco. Yeah, but it's interesting how there are these other saints. So you do more and more research, and you find, I think, even to a certain extent, San Gennaro has something, you know, protecting Naples against whatever the flavor of the month was, whatever
Right.
the, you know, whether it was a plague, whether it was the volcano. And actually, I mean, again, this is an Italian show, so we're going to go off on tangents and different topics. But I think it's also interesting to bring up that, what was it, 2 days ago, that the blood, or 2 or 3 days ago, the blood of San Gennaro liquefied.
Yes.
Which
Yes.
I think is, you know, it's again, they say that if it doesn't liquefy, then problems come. So maybe this is a way that's slowly coming out of this turmoil that we're going through. I don't know if any of you guys could talk maybe a touch about that, about San Gennaro and the liquefaction of the blood. Brendan?
I mean, it's a miracle that's repeated itself for centuries, and Januarius, as we call him in anglicized Latin, the patron of Naples, Neapolitan devotion, and I'm saying this as a very proud Sicilian, is very very expressive. It's very lively, and I would just say that what, you know, Januarius is just as, he has no lesser importance than Angelus or Rosalia or Rocco or any of our other saints. It's not that one is jealous of the other, and even further is the greater glory of God. The Psalms say God is magnified, he's wonderful in his saints. So I certainly can't pray to enough of them. And Januarius's blood, it's a symbol of hope. And I don't want to cross into superstition or whatever, but I see that his liquefaction again as a sign of hope. And again, like Angelus, who shed his blood for Christ, and like all of the other martyrs, especially among the saints, we can only pray for the grace to embrace that cross of Christ as they did. Our Lord said, whoever wants to be my disciple, let him take up his cross and follow me. And that taking up our own cross may not result in blood martyrdom or red martyrdom. It may only be a white martyrdom. And certainly just to live faithfully, as I mentioned earlier, according to our Christian call in this day and age, in 2020, amid the increasingly secular society, amid now coronavirus and any other difficulty we might encounter, it takes real heroism. We need to be heroic. The time for mediocrity on a spiritual level, on a human level, it's over. And we need the examples of all of these saints to encourage us, to instruct us, and to guide us in our quest for Christian heroism too.
Amen. That's a great point.
I just like to piggyback on that. Really, like I think the martyrs, for example, as Brendan was mentioning, we all suffer martyrdoms. I know many people I know in ministry now, even the school families, they lost a parent or grandparents. So a lot of people are suffering different martyrdoms, and they're not physical martyrdoms, but they are a martyrdom nonetheless. And I think we could look to these saints as an inspiration of that, how to deal with suffering well, uniting us with the cross of Jesus. Just a little bit about Saint Angelo now. At our general chapter in Rome, which just happened a few months ago, the bishop.
Oh, we lost Father. Okay, we lost Father. Let's see if he can connect with us again. So, traditionally, if I'm not mistaken, but Sant'Angelo, he has 2 feast days, correct?
He does. So one is May 5th, today, his liturgical feast, and the other falls in August. It may be August 25th, somewhere in late August. And again, it's like Lo Festino, or the Festino, the little feast, which is actually bigger than her main feast of September 4th in Palermo, of Santa Rosalia, recalling in gratitude how she delivered Palermo from the plague in the 1600s. As we were talking about earlier, Angelus delivered his adopted town of Licata from the plague, and other places in Sicily as well, Palermo, where he had healed at least 7 lepers during his life. And so the Licatesi celebrate him also in August, and that's a great opportunity during what Italians call the Ferragosto, when the Italian immigrants come back, if possible, to their towns to celebrate their patron.
Now, the feast that I know you sent me a couple of videos earlier. So the feast, that particular feast, would be the feast of May 5th.
Right. And they have a procession in August as well.
Let's see if I could. I was going to see if I could open up that particular. So this was I'm going to actually share this video. I don't know if you guys can see it or even hear it. I don't know how this works, but here is so what they're bringing out. I guess so you guys do see this, right? You see the video?
Yes.
So they are bringing out the there it is. I think it's a little too small. I'm not too sure how to make it bigger, but they're bringing out. So those are the actual remains of
the urn. Right, and those remains in the past few weeks have been removed from that urn, and they've undergone what is called canonical recognition. Because of the 800th anniversary of his martyrdom taking place, the Archdiocese of Agrigento, in which Licata is located, and the Order of Carmelites of the Ancient Observance, or the Kels Carmelites, to which St. Angelus belonged, performed the canonical recognition of his relics, and temporarily they're enshrined in the original urn or casket, which I think I sent you a picture of too, Anthony,
yes.
that housed them. But over the past year, there was a fundraiser that has spread across the world among the Licatese immigrants for a new urn that those relics will be placed in the next few months. And then actually what we've learned too is that the Licatese or any other devotees in Licata will be able to, once we're back in our churches on a universal level after COVID, or at least the worst of it is over, they'll, like St. Anthony of Padua and other saints, the actual bones will be exposed, and we'll be able to see those firsthand before they're placed in the new urn.
So,
I
Father,
have a relic of him.
of Sant'Angelo.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is, so you're seeing now, like I said, this is kind of, this whole StreamYard is new to me, so I'm able to now get the full, you can see the full video. So they're actually running through the streets with the urn, right? With his remains.
Right.
That's
right.
amazing.
So it's a local custom among the Licatese to run the last part of the corso, the percorso della processione, the last part of the procession, and now they're in the piazza. So it's you see similar things throughout Sicily and the rest of southern Italy too.
So Father Justin is back. Father, I know you were making a point. If you could pick up on that.
Now, which part I got cut out there? Was it about our friars?
The general chapter.
Yeah, the general chapter.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
the whole thing was cut out.
Sorry. Okay, that's fine. Yeah. So we just had a general chapter recently, and the Bishop of Sicily requested that the Carmelites once again staff the shrine of Sant'Angelo. So one of our friars from our province volunteered, with the permission of our provincial, to go there for 3 years. So it's an international house. There are friars from Italy, South America, that will be staffing this house, a living community there, and kind of staffing the shrine. So it's something that we're looking forward to. Unfortunately, I don't know if you heard this, but the brother that's supposed to be going, the friar is supposed to be going, because of the coronavirus, is not able to get there yet, because they were going to start last month, this new community there. So only one friar, the Italian friars, are there, but the other two friars weren't able to get there yet because of the coronavirus. So if we could say a prayer for them to get there, because I know they're looking forward to this new kind of mission and the excitement that they have of kind of the order returning to the shrine and staffing it and being available to people. And it is a great place of pilgrimage. One of the brothers was telling me how many pilgrims go a year. A large number of pilgrims go a year. Still many people report favors and graces and miracles there. So it's a place of healing. And I think, as we mentioned during this time of the pandemic, Sant'Angelo is one of these saints that we could turn to even intercede for us in our own time.
Absolutely. So now so the Carmelites were no longer in Licata until recently?
So they didn't staff the shrine. There was a number of years, I don't know the exact number of years, but there was a number of years that it became a diocesan shrine, and the Carmelites were not there. And then this past general chapter, which was a few months ago, the bishop petitioned the order to send the Carmelites back to Licata to staff the shrine in honor of Sant'Angelo, because again, he's our proto-martyr, our first martyr, and a great Carmelite saint. So the order, they presented it to the order, and everyone was very excited about that. And then they asked basically for volunteers to go to Italy and to staff the shrine, to have an international house. And the friar that's going, he's obviously he's fluent in English and Spanish, Italian, so he's able to help, because I think he was telling me there are a number of pilgrims that go, not just Italians that go, but there are a number of people that visit the shrine. So he'll be able to minister to those non-speaking Italians, pilgrims that go there.
So what is the connection then between, because you mentioned that there were a couple other saints that Carmelite saints that kind of worked or evangelized in Sicily. Why Sicily? Is there a reason? Does anybody know? Any of you guys know the reason why they chose Sicily as fertile ground to bring the word of to bring the word?
Yeah, I think also the Carmelites had to leave the Holy Land because of the persecution from, we could say, the modern day Muslims. So there was a persecution of Christians in the Holy Land, and so many of the Carmelites the original Carmelites were either crusaders that went to the Holy Land to fight the crusade, but then wanted to live this life of kind of solitude and prayer on Mount Carmel, and living the eremitical life, and so there were a bunch of hermits living on Mount Carmel, Christian hermits. that they went to St. Albert of Jerusalem in the year 1208, asking for a rule of life to be formulated for them. So that's kind of the origins of the order. Now, some traditions says we go back to Elijah the prophet. They were Jewish hermits on Mount Carmel, and then they became Christian hermits. But that's happened in 1208. But around that, soon after that, there was this persecution of the Christians. So the Carmelites had to leave, even though this order was formed. They had to leave the Holy Land. They had to leave Mount Carmel, and many of them went back to Europe where they came from. And in this case, with Saint Angelo, was asked to go to Europe to preach. And also to bring this to get the rule approved by Pope Honorius III. So it was like a twofold reason, I think. And then just the way they traveled at the time, leaving the Holy Land, a lot of the early hermits went to Cyrus first, then southern Italy, and then made their way up through Italy to France, and then eventually Simon Stock in 1251, that's where he received the scapular, went to Aylesford in England. So that was kind of the areas that they could have come from originally, but also that's where the order kind of started spreading around. So going to those parts of Europe. I mean, even Naples, we have the La Bruna, which is our icon of Our Lady Mount Carmel. The tradition said that came from the Holy Land, painted by St. Luke, that was venerated on Mount Carmel, and eventually made its way to Naples. So I guess it was just kind of the logical route, leaving the Holy Land to mainland Italy, and then making its way all the way up to the order spreading through France, Spain, and then England.
Well, just in a general sense, though, Sicily really was the kind of the what did they say, like the belly button of the Mediterranean. Kind of that was the center of the Mediterranean. So really, a lot of people, whether it was the Greeks, whether it was the Saracens, whether it was the Phoenicians, everybody kind of went through Sicily. and I think even
free afternoon made their way through Sicily.
And even really, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Brendan, you probably know this better, that I'm talking thousands of years ago, Sicily was a lush forest, and it was deforested by probably the Greeks, who used it to use the wood to build their fleet.
Right, and especially in southern Sicily, but even, for example, my part of Sicily, of Musumeli, that's in what we call the Vallone, or the Big Valley, in the center of the island. It's unspeakably beautiful. It's very lush, very green, a higher elevation. So and that nature provided, that natural setting provided a very appropriate and very beautiful medium for the aeromedical life too. Probably the most famous hermits in Sicily, and there are many others, but one's Santa Rosalia, Saint Rosalie, who we've already talked about, and also Saint Calogero, or Calogerus, for which there's really no real English translation, but he had come from Northern Africa, settled in Sicily, and really became the primary Sicilian thaumaturgus, miracle worker. So there's a beautiful long history and tradition of sanctity, and particularly of the religious and aeromedical life in Sicily, that not too many people are aware of.
No, I'll be honest with you. I did not know that. I think of more of I think of Egypt as a hermetical place, the Holy Land. But really, I don't really think of. Although I guess even thinking of the Byzantine monks of what Grottaferrata, weren't they kind of had that hermetical life?
In Rome, I mean, outside of Rome, Grottaferrata are the Italo-Greek monks to this day. But it's interesting, and we had brought this up, Anthony, in our show, the first show that I was on, about the saints intercessors for the pandemic, talking about Santa Rosalia and the influence that the Basilian order had on her. Well, Angelus had stayed with the Basilians in Palermo. He stayed with the monks of St. Basil in Palermo. So there's another connection there too with the Basilians.
Well, really,
again, coming from the Greeks ultimately, because the Basilians were Greek in origin and then made their way to Sicily
But again, though,
and
you know,
throughout Italy.
the Greek influence, the Byzantine influence is it's palpable in southern Italy and in Sicily.
Right. So we should remember, as very, very proud as we are, and justifiably so, of being Roman Catholics, as being Catholics of the Latin Rite, we should be mindful of the other lung, as of both lungs, as John Paul II called us to, that we're not just Latin speakers and Romans, but we're members of a universal church, and the other part of that, a big part of that, an ancient part of that, are the Greeks. And it's interesting too, because we think we go back to the Holy Land. Angelus was a Hebrew, he was a Jew, originally, ethnically a Catholic, but from Jerusalem. And the traditional Carmelite rite, the traditional rite of Mass for the Carmelite order, the Cals Carmelites, that was abandoned after just after basically Saint Teresa of Jesus of Avila and Saint John of the Cross. The Carmelite rite, more officially, is called the Rite of the Holy Sepulchre. And that is the Mass and the office and the other parts of the liturgy that the Carmelites used. And that liturgy really developed at the Holy Sepulchre. It was a unique form of the Mass there because the Carmelites were born there, at Mount Carmel, in Jerusalem, in the Holy Land, and that spread with them throughout the world. So that rite was celebrated by Angelus, celebrated by Albert, and is still celebrated in some places today.
Now,
And again, a big part of that is Greek in origin of the Carmelite rite, so we have the Greeks to thank for that too.
Now, Father Eugene, you are a third order Carmelite. So,
Yes.
what does that mean to be a third order Carmelite?
It's an affiliation with the order. Normally, there are many of the third order members are lay members, so they have an affiliation with the graces, the spiritual life of the first order Carmelites. They share in all of the spiritual benefits of the prayers and the sacrifices offered by the first order monks and sisters and nuns. So we try to embrace the spirituality of Carmel. So like, the beautiful writings of Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, the Little Way of Therese. So again, we are members of the Order of Carmel. Maybe Justin could, speak about that in a more sophisticated way. My training, of course, was kind of sparse in Carmelite history and spirituality. My joining the Third Order Carmelites really was out of my love for Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And again, that goes back to my childhood. So I always wanted to have a better affiliation with Mary under that title. And I had the opportunity to start the Third Order here on Staten Island.
Oh, wow.
There was not a Third Order here. The members had to go to Brooklyn, and I was approached by a laywoman from my parish who was a Third Order member in Brooklyn and said, Father, we've been wanting to come to Staten Island. Would you be willing to host us in your parish? At that time, I was at St. Adalbert here on Staten Island. And I said, sure. And it took a good number of years before it was approved. So we were really distanced from the Carmelites because the mother house is in Middletown, which is kind of far from Staten Island. So we really don't have a taste of Carmelite life here on Staten Island. So
that brings up two interesting points. I mean, I just want to talk about, because you mentioned St. John of the Cross and his writings, which are very, very profound. You talk about the dark night of the soul,
right.
And really, in a way, I think that through this coronavirus pandemic, each of us, in a way, can be going through this dark night of the soul, because we don't know what the future holds. We don't know, is God really there? They're closing the churches on us. We can't go to confession. We can't even go visit our loved ones in the cemeteries because the cemeteries are closed. So I guess, again, like I said, we're always going to move away from the main topic. But maybe Father Justin, you could talk a little bit about that. How can we, I guess, overcome this feeling of a fear of what's going to happen in the future with this whole pandemic?
Yeah, well, I think the whole thing is we have to surrender and trust. And I think that's what really the heart of kind of John the Cross is, and even Teresa of Avila, they talk about this. In the spiritual life, there's times of consolation and there's times of desolation, right? So there's peaks and the valleys. And I think the Carmelite masters in the spiritual life would say it's during those times of desolation, it's almost a purification of the soul, right? It is a purification of the soul. And Teresa talks about gods have to die. So sometimes we kind of put false images of God up, or false, I find this working with young people is very helpful. This whole explain the dark night of the soul to them, because a lot of times, they're adolescents, and a lot of times they'll go through a phase of saying, "Oh, Father, I don't believe in God. I'm an atheist," and they're really not atheists. They're basically their image of God was very childish. Not childlike, like the Lord tells us, but childish. They think of him like as a Santa Claus. If I'm good, he'll bless me. If I'm bad, I'm get in trouble. That type of thing. It's a very simple image, or he's only there, like when I need something, type of thing. But in a way, that those false images of God has to die, and it's usually through suffering, through the cross, that we are stripped of our selfishness, our pride, and it's through that suffering. It's the Paschal mystery, right? Death to resurrection. So we have to die to ourselves in order for Christ to live, and for the true God to live. So I think that's kind of what John the Cross would talk about in the dark night of the soul. Like in the darkness, we find God. In the struggle, in the suffering, we surrender our own wills, our own desires, so that Christ could truly live within us. St. Paul talks about that. It's not I who live, but Christ Jesus who lives in me. But it usually comes through the cross, through suffering, through darkness at times. But that's when faith is real there. That's when faith becomes real. It's easy to believe in God when you feel that he's close. It's hard to, real prayer is trusting and praying when I don't feel like praying, or I even feel like, God, are you listening? But the fact that I'm praying, I'm making an act of faith, I'm making an act of trust, and that's really how God fills us with himself after we're emptied of ourselves, as kind of John the Cross would talk about.
Now, I just posted I put up a picture here. It's a quote of from Saint John of the Cross. In the dark night of the soul, bright flows the river of God. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit, Father Justin?
Yeah. So in the dark night of the soul, yeah, there God is. So in our image of who we set up as God, usually it's ourselves. That was the original sin, right? The devil said they will be like God. The pride, right? So once we could die to ourselves, our selfishness, our pride, we have to surrender ourselves and open ourselves, and there God's grace comes alive within us. It's in him we live and move and have our being. So it's through that emptying of self, and again, usually the only way to it is through the cross. It's through that darkness, because once we're at that point, we the only way to turn is to God. I mean, you're not getting it from yourself anymore. You're not finding any comfort by your own power, your own strength. So you get to that point of surrender and empty, and really self-emptying, emptying yourself so that Christ could live within you.
There's that famous quote, that famous saying, there are no atheists in foxholes.
Yes,
and
exactly.
so in a way, when and I don't know, I mean, for I guess our two priests can speak to this, that I have been seeing, even Facebook can be so rife with anger and resentment and anti-God stuff. But I've been seeing, it seems to me that more and more people, in a way, are turning toward God, whether they're watching these live stream masses at home now. So have either Father Justin or Father Eugene, have you seen that there are, to a certain extent, people kind of turning back toward the cross, turning back toward our Lord?
I think people are. I think people are missing the Mass. They're telling me, on Facebook, or if they see me as they're driving past, if I'm sitting on the steps, they'll say, Father, I can't wait to get back to Mass. And I think that that's something that you would never have heard before. Many people would find any excuse not to go to Mass. In fact, a woman that has come back to church after many, many years said to me on the phone, I can't believe how long I just didn't go. And it didn't matter. And now it matters. So, I mean, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's out of I don't think it's out of boredom. I think it's really out of that desire to be part of the family, part of the community. Certainly missing receiving the Eucharist. People, I think, now have a better appreciation for it. Even our second graders, they were supposed to make First Communion Saturday. And, many of them post things on Facebook, how upset the kids were. And so I responded by basically saying, imagine how much more wonderful it's going to be because they were denied it. When you're denied something, you want it more. Think about whatever you give up for Lent, you desire it most when you give it up. So the same thing, I think the same thing holds true for people having that desire to come back to the Mass. Church is open, people can come in, but the Eucharist, people really miss the Eucharist.
Definitely.
And they realize.
Tony,
I'm sorry.
I was just thinking, going back to Saint John of the Cross, who had been imprisoned by his own brothers, the religious brothers, the other Carmelite friars, and he was stuck in that cell. And it's while he was in that tiny prison cell that he underwent the dark night, and that he was able to produce his most famous works. And for a man, for a priest, a saint, who was already, before his unjust imprisonment, so closely united to God, imagine how difficult it was for him to be deprived of the Mass. He couldn't celebrate Mass or attend Mass or to receive Holy Communion. And John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila, the two great reformers of Carmel, the founders of the Discalced Carmel, they didn't just come out of nowhere. They were calced Carmelites, and they were themselves the heirs of the primitive rule and observance of Carmel, and that was in large part due thanks to Saint Angelus, who had brought Carmelite life to Europe, in so far as in Sicily and in Italy, and they themselves, these two great, unbelievably, unimaginably great mystics and doctors of the Church, both of them, were devoted to Saint Angelus. Angelus was for them also a guide, a teacher, a master, a brother, a father, and a friend. So if he was good enough for Saints Teresa and John, then he should be more than good enough for us too. We have a lot to learn from him today.
Absolutely. Father Justin, can you add anything to that about people
Yeah.
missing the Mass? About
It's kind of funny. I read when this first happened. We kept our church open here in Terrytown, and I can't tell you how often I just see people in there praying in quiet and silence. And I guess Brendan would mention in the traditional Mass, but in the new Mass is not enough time of silence. I mean, we as Carmelites always try to foster that, like after the homily, after communion, we try to bring silence into the liturgy. But I think in a way this made people contemplative, like our big Carmelite spirituality is, the cell is a place where you encounter God. That's our, our place where we encounter God, our room. And so many people's homes have become that. So many people's homes have become a place of prayer. I mean, that's a good thing that will come out of this. I mean, I think it's terrible that people have been, they're not able to have the sacraments readily available to them. But I think the good things that I see coming out from this, even it seems like a fast, from the Eucharist. Even Augustine, I think, talks about that towards the end of his life. There was such a Eucharistic fast that he wasn't able to receive as frequently as he would like to. But the idea is that people have become more contemplative in prayer. Like there's a student of mine, he's a senior. He reached out to me and he was just telling me how he feels like he's on a Kairos retreat. We took them on retreat in the beginning of the year, and he says he goes for long walks. He leaves his phone at home. He just spends time thinking and praying. And this kid wasn't like an overly devout kid. He went on the retreat, but that was kind of about it. But after this experience, again, he was able to go back to, he said, I feel like I'm on a big Kairos retreat. I'm just spending a lot of time thinking, reflecting about my life, spending time in prayer, shutting the phone off, less distractions. And I think that's really the good that's coming out of, that could come out of this, again, a longing for the Eucharist, a longing for the sacraments, but also at the same time, people have maybe gone deeper in their prayer life, and even bringing their prayer into their homes, into their rooms.
Definitely. Before we conclude this evening, there are a couple of comments that came up during the night, so I just wanted to bring them up and bring them onto the screen. So there is a comment from Jacqueline through, I guess this is YouTube. She says, "Hi, Father Justin, from your cousins in South Florida."
Oh, yeah, thank you.
And she also said, "We are all watching from our living room as a familia."
Nice.
And we have a comment. I'm sorry, Brendan.
No, I was just. Well, go ahead. Let's read.
We
Brendan's
also
comments
have from Ray Guarini from Italian Enclaves Historical Society. Great to see you, Brendan Young, and Father Eugene Carrella. Great piece, Anthony Scillia. And then we also have a comment by Peter, he's from your area, right, Brendan?
That's right. He's the president of the Federation of Italian American Societies of Western New York, and a very, very proud Sicilian American from Valle d'Olmo originally. And we're very blessed and very grateful to have such a tremendous leader in our community.
And he said, "Very enlightening and greatly appreciated. Bravi tutti. Viva Saint Angelo di Licata." So go ahead, Brendan. What were you going to say?
Well, I just wanted to say quickly, I know we don't have much time left, but as I mentioned, Angelo was a guide for Teresa and John and so many others throughout the centuries. And particularly, he was and still is so beloved primarily by the immigrants and their descendants. So you see behind me, of course, the banner of Saint Angelo di Licata, his society in Buffalo. The banner dates to 1922. Mm. In the church, at St. Anthony's Church here in Buffalo, we have a life-size statue of him that actually was not originally in our church. It was in a church called Our Lady of Mount Carmel on Dante Place in a different area of Buffalo down the street, but in a neighborhood that was formerly called the Hooks. And there it is. And that neighborhood was called the Hooks. It was the poorest area of Buffalo on the waterfront, on the Niagara River, Lake Erie. And they called it the Hooks because different crimes occurred there, and among those were murders. And so the bodies were dumped in the river, and so they would have to use a hook to pull the bodies out of that area. And unfortunately, the first immigrants, particularly from Sicily, our southern Italian immigrants, had to settle there because of their financial constraints. And they built there, not the first Italian church in Buffalo, which is again St. Anthony's, but they built their own parish, Madonna del Carmine, Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And the Licatesi who were there celebrated Sant Angelo. And they did so until the church was closed in about 1949. There's a record of the feast there as late as 1948, and then the church was demolished in 1950. That statue of theirs, that life-size statue, beautiful statue that I mentioned earlier, enthralled me as a child, then got its second and final home here at St. Anthony's in Buffalo. And the society, there were two feasts, two masses and processions, both at Mount Carmel and St. Anthony's. And since 1950, permanently at St. Anthony's throughout all these years, this is the first year that, again, because of the coronavirus, the Licatesi were not able to publicly celebrate their patrono, their patron saint, but the devotion among the Licatesi, no matter where they are in the world, if they're in the US, and primarily that's Buffalo, Brooklyn, as Father Carrella mentioned, at Sacred Heart St. Stephen, and then in Cleveland, I'm not sure which parish, I would guess though, Our Lady of Mount Carmel or San Rocco, staffed by the Mercedarians there, in the United States. But again, Licatesi in all other parts of the world, there's a strong devotion, thanks also to the Carmelite friars in South America and Brazil and other countries, in Malta, as I mentioned. So this devotion is still strong. It needs to be rekindled, including on a local level in Buffalo, because unfortunately, like every paese, like every city and town in Italy, they're immigrants, but more so their descendants, third, fourth, fifth, sixth generations in Buffalo, they don't feel as connected, and so they're losing that devotion. But we need this devotion. As a patron against plagues, as a teacher of the spiritual life, of silence and solitude, and fidelity to Christ, as I mentioned, heroic faithfulness, even to the point of real martyrdom. We need Angelus today. We need Sant'Angelo. I was blessed after 15 years of knowing who Angelus was, more than 15 years, to discover this little statue at an estate sale in October, November, and I rescued him. I pray every time I'm here at St. Anthony's Church to him, remembering not only the Licatesi, but all of my friends and family. And what better occasion than the 800th anniversary, the 8th centenary of his martyrdom, than to rediscover or discover and grow our devotion to this beautiful saint. He's patron not just of Licata or Sant'Angelo Muxaro or any other place, Caltabellotta, Palermo, what have you. He can be our patron anywhere, anytime. So if you haven't prayed to him yet, please start praying, because we need all the help we can get.
That we do. What and on that note, I mean, like I said, we could go on all night long. And again, I would like to do a show in the future about Our Lady of Mount Carmel, because really for the Italians, especially those that came out of Naples, out of the port of Naples, that was one of the last views they saw was La Bruna, La Madonna Bruna, the image of Our Lady. So there is a lot more there that we would definitely get to in a future episode. But fathers, Brendan, thank you so much for taking time out, coming on the show. Before we go, I just want to say, is there any way that, are you guys on social media? Are you guys have a website? Is there any way that people can contact you, Father Justin?
Yes, I'm on Instagram, so it's Father Justin O.Carm. So it's all one word, FATHERJUSTIN O.Carm. Yeah, I would love to talk. I have so many beautiful stories about the Scapri and Our Lady of Mount Carmel. So let me know when you have that show on her.
Yeah, that could almost be a series, because there are so many. Really, people. I mean, even myself. I'm wearing tonight. I'm wearing my Mount Carmel shirt. So there is. I mean, again, I mean, like I said, I could keep on going, but they canceled this year. I think it's the second time in history that they canceled the Giglio in Brooklyn, which is definitely connected to Our Lady of Mount Carmel, obviously. So yes, we will have to have a probably a week-long discussion.
We have a procession here on Staten Island for Our Lady of Mount Carmel that we're canceling this year as well.
Oh,
really?
She originally came from my old neighborhood in Brooklyn. We have her in our church. This would be her 75th anniversary. And so we were not going to be able to celebrate it in July like we normally do.
Oh.
It's heartbreaking. Anthony, it really is.
It is.
Well,
it's heartbreaking also for us that 2 days ago on Sunday, he's always celebrated here in Buffalo, Sant'Angelo, on the first Sunday of May. Again, we weren't able to celebrate him, but I want to invite all of our viewers, our listeners, if you're just passing through, come and visit our beautiful Church of St. Anthony's here in Buffalo. We have feasts all the time. You're welcome at any of our masses or all of our masses. We're half an hour from Niagara Falls, so come and see one of the first Italian churches in the United States. Siete benvenuti. We would love to have you, and we await you with open arms.
Excellent. And Father Eugene, how could people get in touch with you?
I'm on Facebook, Eugene Carrella. Basically, that's it.
And the website for the church is www.stritachurch.net.
Yes, and I really don't have anything to do with that, but you can get information about the parish and what's going on, or they can call the rectory. I'd be happy. I have a great collection of statuary, relics. So if people want to be blessed with any relic, I have a couple hundred. So
I said that's going to be another show. We're going to talk about your devotion one day, Father.
Sure. It was a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, again, I want to thank you all for taking time. I know we kind of literally threw this together in a couple of hours because I just said when I was reading about him this morning, I said something. We have to do something for Saint Angelo. I don't know. I just feel one of my best friends is his name is Angelo, so I had the connection. I said, okay, we have to celebrate him. So again, fathers, Brendan, thank you so much.
Thank
for
you.
taking time out, coming on the show. We have a couple of shows coming up. The end of the week, we're going to be talking with Mike DeSapio of DeSapio. He does a Italian dual citizenship. So we're talking to him later in the week. And next week, we're going to have a very interesting show about the future of tourism in Italy. And we have Danielle Terry and Allison Scola joining us for that show. So that's going to be Monday night at 7:30 as well. So again, I want to thank you all for tuning in. God bless you all. Viva Sant'Angelo.
Viva Sant'Angelo.
Viva Sant'Angelo. God bless you.
We'll see you next time, guys. Take care. Ciao.